Hello friends and fellow bakers, it's Chef Tom from chefandcircuittom.com. Welcome back to the channel. Thanks so much for joining me today. I talked about pie dough and pie assembly last episode, and I hope you like those little hand pies I made. I got a really good response from those who enjoyed them, mainly family and friends, of course. This week we're going to take a look at the pie filling method called cooked fruit. Now I know you're saying, well, Chef Tom, it's all cooked fruit. But what we do is pre-cook the fruit before it goes in the pie. You're probably familiar with the old-fashioned method where you toss the fruit with some sugar, spices, and starch, and then you throw it in the pie shell and you bake it off. The problem with that, though, is that you don't know what the texture will be when you get done. Will it be dry or too moist? Will you have like kind of an open dome in the middle? It's not a really foolproof way to go. With the cooked fruit method, though, my method, well, a lot of people's method, you pre-cook the fruit to get exactly the texture you're looking for. This method is used when you have pretty hard fruit that needs to be cooked down, like apples, for instance. Now, if you have frozen or canned fruit with a ton of juice, you're going to use the cooked juice method. But we're going to leave that method for another video. Well, let's make some apple pie filling. Meet me in the kitchen. Well, let's get our mise en place ready. We're going to start with some Granny Smith apples. And really, Granny Smith, I think, is kind of the best apple to use for apple pie filling. I feel it has the best texture, good flavor, good acid. You can mix it up with other apples, but I would say use this as your core apple. Speaking of coring, you're going to want to peel and core and trim these apples really, really well. If you do that, you'll have no extraneous stuff in your pie filling. And just ask my students. They will tell you what a fanatic I am about getting these things clean. And this comes from my days in a hotel where we would be really chastised if we didn't get the apples completely clean. So we're going to make sure those are chopped really well. We're also going to use some water just to get us started and to kind of regulate the consistency of our pie filling. A little lemon juice for our acidity. And that's a big deal too with this too. If it's too sweet, then it's not going to be any good in pie filling either. You want it to have a little bit of balance of acid to sweetness. Speaking of sweetness, we've got white granulated sugar and some brown sugar. And I start with the brown sugar when I cook them, and then I finish it with the granulated white sugar, as you'll see in just a second. A little bit of salt for flavor enhancement, butter to help saute the apples in the beginning, but then also some butter for a little extra shininess in your filling when you finish. And then, of course, your cornstarch. The cornstarch is going to be mixed with water for your slurry, and that will thicken the pie filling. That's all your ingredients. You'll need a spatula, several knives for, of course, peeling, trimming, and coring. I like to use a peeler to peel mine. That way you don't take quite as much of the fruit. You keep that intact. I like the rubber handle one as best. And of course, you'll need your pot. Got a good stainless steel pot here to start. And then a bowl to put the finished filling in. That's pretty much it. So I would say, let's get these apples peeled and cored and trimmed. Now I like to use chunks instead of slices. A lot of people will use slices because that's what they were always brought up on. And that's one way to go. I find though that chunks work better. The slices are fine, but they can turn into mush, kind of an applesauce pretty quickly. This might come from my experience with students for over 25 years. You got to be really careful not to overcook your apples. So I find the chunks work pretty good. It's got a nice bite to the tooth, and I think you're going to like the texture and the look when you're finished. I like to peel the apples this way, pole to pole. It keeps the shape of the fruit intact, and that way we get the most efficient use out of our peeler as well. When I see people whacking away at them like that, I always think, A, that's not very efficient, But also, you can end up taking off a lot more peel than you really want to. Just do a little bit, go all the way around, finish the ends, and finish the top. Now on to the chopping and coring. And we'll chop each one of these guys in half. Don't run away. And then I'm going to use the teaspoon of my measuring scoop to pour that center out. You can also do it with a knife if you want to, but be really super careful. If you use a knife, it can be a little dangerous because we are talking about some of the ends kind of slippery. This way, no sharp implements needed. Once they're cored, we're going to go and take out this center portion here, and that is part of the core as well. But I find that you lose the least amount of apple if you do it this way with a knife or even a paring knife. If you want to use a paring knife, you could as well. Either way is fine. In fact, maybe I'll transfer to my paring knife. But one of the things one of my chefs taught me when I started doing this was he said, if you care about your customers, you'll really take a lot of care in the way you trim your fruit. Make it show that you really care about your customers. And I was like, that kind of really stuck with me. He was pretty hard on us, but he taught us well. Also, a lot of people will have you put your apples in water at this point. I would recommend not putting them in water unless you're doing very, very large quantities of apples. We're doing a relatively small quantity of apples. Just work quickly. And you say, well, okay, I'm not that quick. Well, start to get quicker. Start to move a little quicker. And even if they do turn a little bit brown, like this guy, the core here is turning a little bit brown, partially because I'm not moving fast enough on the video. But that way, if you put a lot of water in your apples, the filling is going to taste like water. I want it to taste like apples. So get these guys trimmed up really, really nice. Make sure there's no more peel or core on there at all. And make sure they look lovely. Care about your customers, even if your customers are your kids or your spouse. They deserve good pie too. There we go. Let's make that go away. That was easy. And now we're going to cut our chunks of apples. Oh, I got a little bit of, just a little bit more peel there. So we're going to cut chunks, maybe about ½ inch or so. And people always go, oh my goodness, what if they're different sizes? Well, different sizes will cook at different rates. That's true. However, in this case, we don't mind if we have a little bit of soft ones, a little bit of harder ones. That's totally okay. And remember, pie is a relatively rustic endeavor anyway. It's not super fancy. Those apples all go in your pot. As does a little bit of water, maybe about an ounce, ounce and a half or so. I like a little squeeze of lemon juice and my brown sugar and my first butter. And I'm going to bring it over to the stove to cook it down. So we're ready to cook down our apples. Remember, what we have in the pot is a little bit of water, squeeze of lemon juice, brown sugar and butter, and of course the apples. Let's turn it on sort of medium heat, and we're going to cook these down relatively slowly and give them a stir right away. And if it needs more water, you can do that. You don't want it to burn the apples at all, of course. And really, there's not much chance of burning them at this point because there's so much liquid in there anyway. And if you'll notice, I haven't put any spices in too. I want to put the spices in right at the end. Spices I might use cinnamon. Obviously, cinnamon is pretty much the common one. But one of my favorites to use is ginger. Ginger works really well in this kind of thing. And in fact, there was one time I was working with a chef, and he said, could we make the filling a little more spicy? And I said, yeah, sure. He said, how about some cayenne pepper? And I said, well, that's a little unusual, but it worked really, really well. So almost any kind of spices spices are going to work well in here. You can use nutmeg, allspice, even cloves. Some people like cloves in theirs as well. Now, what we're going to do while we're waiting for those guys to cook down, we're going to bring it up a little bit in heat, is put a little bit of water, maybe about 50, 60 grams of water in our cornstarch, and we'll give that a little stir, again with these handy measuring spoons. Now, you're going to want to remember to re-stir this though during, after you've mixed it up, because all the cornstarch, by the time we get done cooking the apples, that cornstarch will have fallen to the bottom of the bowl there. But right now it's nice and combined. Make sure you get everything off the side there. I can kind of feel them a little bit more at the bottom. You don't have to really tend to these that much. I really wouldn't walk away. They're gonna cook in about maybe 10 minutes or so. We'll edit out all the boring parts, of course. But we're going to cook these apples down just until they're tender enough to be pierced by either a paring knife or a fork. You don't want to overcook it. If you overcook it, you get applesauce. So keep it moving there. So I've turned these down to sort of a medium heat. They're starting to get a little bit more opaque, a little softer in texture, and they're releasing a ton of liquid into the pot. And that is exactly what we want to have happen. And this is one of the cool ways we can use the cooked fruit method, in that we can really control the thickness of our finished filling by cooking it on the stove and thickening it to our own like. Now would be a good time to give it a test. And I'm starting to pierce that fruit pretty easily. Could use maybe just a little bit more cooking, but not much more. And when you do add the slurry, it's really important that you have the liquid at a boil. If you find that yours doesn't get any liquid, you can always add more water in when you go to thicken it. But it should give up some moisture as it cooks down. Now we're also going to give this a stir. You probably can't see it, but that had separated the cornstarch and water. This is going to be our slurry. And we can add that in all at once. And again, we're going to give this a good stir. And we're going to bring it back to the boil. Right now it looks kind of whitish. As we cook this down, it'll become a lot more translucent. That's looking pretty sweet. And we kind of want to look for, in the center here, we want that to be kind of a opaque looking. It should glug glug right in the center, and we got the glug glug, and we are all set to go. Now you can transfer this filling to a big bowl here, and we're going to finish this filling off in just a second as I put this into the other bowl here. This will help cool it down too. You never want to put hot filling like this into a pie. If you do it hot, you're going to melt the pie dough, and that's no good. You don't want that. So our filling now looks pretty doggone thick. One of the cool things about this is we're going to add our sugar now. We're going to add the remaining butter, because of course we want that shine. Salt for flavor enhancement. A little bit of cinnamon. I don't like to overdo it. And I like to finish it off with just a little more lemon juice there and give this a good stir. You say, well, Tom, why don't you add all the sugar at once? Well, the sugar inhibits the thickening of the cornstarch. So we only use a little bit of brown sugar to get it started, and then we'll finish it off with this granulated sugar after we have our pie filling already thickened. That is a key element in making good pie filling. Now, you can add more spices in this if you want, but I just put a little bit in, just not to overdo it. This is a good base filling to start with. And as you can see, these are relatively soft, but not mushy, and definitely not applesauce. That is a key thing too. That's your whole pie filling. Now, you're gonna want to let this cool. If you're in a hurry, you can put it in an ice bath. I wouldn't put it in the refrigerator though. You never want to put hot foods in the refrigerator. The refrigerator is for keeping cold foods cold, right? You know that. Anyway, you're gonna let this cool off, and if you want to use it tomorrow, you could put it into a container and then put it in the fridge once it's room temperature. That's it. As you can see, the cooked fruit method worked quite well. Any fruit that is hard can use this method. We'll look at cooked juice another time. Thanks so much for checking out the video this week. I do appreciate it. Be sure to like and subscribe if you have some time. And I do thank you for that. We'll see you next week. Happy baking.